Hey everybody, this is Kathy Klotz-Guest from Keeping It Human. Thanks for watching this, another video series hangout with the storytelling practitioners. And today we have a great guest, somebody I'm so excited about, and she is one of my favorite people under the storytelling stars, and that is Annette Simmons. And she is somebody who's been doing this for a long time. Her clients, she has a long list of clients, including NASA and some other people. She's been on NPR, she's been on CNBC, she's the author of several books, and she wrote The Story Factor and also Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. And she's that book, which I love, is in its second edition, and I've got it right here, see? Because I love it, because I love it so much, so we got to get that in. Yay! Welcome, see, I'm going to put your name on there. Yay! Welcome to the Hangout, Annette.
I'm Annette Simmons, and this is my lower third, but probably backwards.
It's more like a lower half, but hey,
okay.
You deserve it. You deserve it. You deserve it. Yeah, we had a few.
It's on yellow paper, which matches my walls, so it's it's obviously custom.
It is custom, and I have to just say this, and we had a little bit of tech challenges on Friday, and one of the things I love about Annette is her attitude. She just like, whatever, she just plows right through and bounces right back, and I just love that attitude. It's like, we're just doing this. So regardless of technology, we are doing this, and we're going to have a great time. So
yeah, so just imagine right here is a lower third that tells you my name, and we're good.
We're good. And I'll just hold it up and now and again, just make sure so everybody knows. It's a great book. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, and I always love talking to you, is that you're one of the few storytellers that I've heard talk about this idea of truth with a capital T in such a captivating way. And it's sort of, I've talked about the human needs in marketing and the human needs in storytelling. And I think each in our own way, we're talking about the same thing. And I love that you talk about this, because I think it's really an important concept in storytelling, is that why do we tell stories? Well, it's to get at truth with a capital T, and not truth with a lower t, which is facts. But you explain it better than anybody. So for our audience, could you explain a little bit about sort of, big T truth in storytelling versus lowercase t truth and facts, and why that big T is so important?
Well, I've been a big fan of truth for a long time, and it's not always just how I defined it. Yeah. But the idea. So when I was a kid, I had this bad habit of just saying stuff that I thought was obvious, and apparently it was not, or it was obvious that nobody in their right mind would say it. And so reading social cues was not really big part. I kind of have truth Tourette's. So if you look at the first two books I wrote, it's, they say all authors' books are autobiographical. So the first book I wrote was Territorial Games, which probably is a direct response to people thinking, get Annette the hell away from this project, or the hell away from me. And I thought that, if I got, I am embarrassed now, but it's just who I am. I thought if I got people like to tell the truth, or at least to be aware of how they were playing these territorial games, that they would quit.
Yeah.
And that's true to a certain extent. It's a lot of people don't realize that they're trying to control the situation. And so micromanagers are control freaks, and everybody knows you don't tell a control freak an unpleasant truth, because they'll turn their control freakness your way, and you have to deal. Well, so I was able to unplug that behavior a little bit, and then I wrote a book called A Safe Place for Dangerous Truth. And so that was my effort to unplug these don't say that, sort of behaviors, which often nobody says they don't want you to tell the truth. They say things like, so I understand you have an opinion, but first we need to deal with these other things. So if we could just set that aside for right now, we'll come back to it. And I'm like, you're never going to come back to it. It's and initially it was conversations I watched, in international business, and I see them talking about how we're going to roll out this new campaign, and somebody's like, well, they're not going to like X, and then I would hear, well, they're just going to have to understand, and I'm like, nobody has to understand anything. And so initially in business, what I noticed is that they would say, okay, look, let's just set that to the side. And they would create these amazing implementation plans that should work, but didn't, because they weren't taking into account people's. So this is a long answer to your question, which is kind of a signature thing for me. I'm sorry. So anyway, so truth, I would talk about a safe place for dangerous truth because I, wrote this book, and I realized that I can't just talk about truth and act like I think I know what the truth is.
Yeah.
I need to be real clear that of a difference. And it occurred to me that, when somebody says, you want to know the truth, I'll tell you the truth. They're about to share their opinion with you, which is an important piece of information you need to have, because it creates the mental terrain through which you're going to have to negotiate. So maybe that's a bunch of dealers telling you the truth.
Right.
And then you've also got the corporate headquarters telling you the truth. And so having to coordinate that is what I was looking at doing. And then I realized that with storytelling, that there are stories that have lasted thousands of years, and that's a whole different kind of truth. Mm-hmm. And that kind of truth is what I call big T truth. And that's a truth that's going to be true. It was true before we were born. It's going to be true long after we're gone. And it's these big T truths that for one thing, you see in religion.
Yeah.
And I remember a storyteller was telling Dame Ragnell, which is a story that a lot of traditional tellers tell, and she described, it was in the story, it's an Arthur tale, King Arthur tale of the Green Knight, and there's this mystery riddle, and so you're trying to find the answer to the riddle, and when he got the right answer, she said, and his heart, and the answer, something about, he could feel his heart burn within him that the answer was the truth. And it's like, that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about big T truth.
Yeah.
It's just undeniable. Kindness can kill hate, and you can tell a story, and all of the movies we watch are the same story over and over and over again about big T truths. Mm-hmm. One of the interesting videos I watched from a female director talking about women's movies and men's movies, and about how, men's movies are supposedly all action. She said, but after the final explosion, that movie doesn't end until the action hero, hugs the female, romantic interest or whatever. It's that moment where two people share big T truth that we're hungry for. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just having it all by ourselves is, it makes a good book, or it's an inspiring experience that then causes you to go do something. But to have it with another person, or even a whole room full of people, like you saw me do that whole, I'll be, what is it? I'll be Eve, you be Adam, and I'm holding this gorgeous red apple. And that blew my mind. I was like, I've never done it before. I was just trying it out. And it was like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got into it.
No, it was great. It was great. And and I've heard you talk about this before, and of course in your books, and it just resonates with me. Now that what you just said was a truth with a capital T. It just resonates with me that the point of capital T truth is that it's meant to be shared. It's a universal, and we know it. And, we can be purveyors of facts all day long, but when we hear the truth and deep in our soul, we know that's a human truth. That's a universal truth. We know it. We just know. And I loved your talking about it, because a lot of the world that I deal in, and I know you do too, because of some of your clients, is, you know, business storytelling. And I think one of the things that seems to me to be really missing from a lot of really great business storytelling is, you know, it's really good at dealing with the facts of the customer, the facts of this, and sometimes not even great at the facts, because we overblow, you know, maybe the features and the benefits and all that stuff, and it's never about those. But it seems to me we're just really missing, in a lot of great business storytelling, an opportunity to tell that big T of what our customer as a human being is going through, and what their concerns are, and what their human frailties or their fears are. They have fears and aspirations, and they don't care about your products. And we don't seem to ever get there. And to me, I feel like that's where business storytelling could be light years better.
Well, and one of the things that was formative in the way I think is Kurt Levin's force field analysis, which is, you know, you can increase so it's, for me, the question is not necessarily, you know, where the forces aren't taking us there. I'm interested in what's the resistance for these business storytellers, where they don't want to go there, because obviously if they wanted to go there, you know, it would be a lot easier for us to help.
Yeah.
And what I see in corporate America, or actually international corporate now, is a whole lot of fear.
Yes.
And it's on several levels. One level of fear is on the personal level, to share your own personal vulnerability.
Yeah.
And you know, as someone over 50, I understand that there's an age, you know, progression there, but so that's one thing. And the other thing is just the old marketing dilemma that was true before, you know, we grabbed onto storytelling, which is, you know, sell benefits, not features. And so now we've got two jobs, you know, to help. And the fear, what I've done is I've tried to reframe the fear in terms of narrative, and the way I find narrative now, because there was a big kerfuffle about, you know, which is which, and it's like, who cares? But
yeah,
I figured out a way to use the word in this particular way. And narrative is the larger conflict. So and all stories have to have conflict, which is, you know, that's why you need to tell your vulnerabilities, because people can't see how wonderful you are without also seeing that, you know, there was some sort of obstacle that you overcame.
Yeah.
And then I started to think about, well, narrative is, you know, all of the great stories have this conflict between good and evil. And then you try to get more specific on that. You know, it's like, and Robert McKee, Robert,
McKee,
right? He, brilliant. I'd love to do his course. Oh my gosh. I've just listened to him online. He said something about if it's an easy, and he was talking about writing a scene, okay, like writing a scene in a movie, and he said you have to set up the dilemma, but he was specific about setting up the dilemma, saying that it has to be either two really good options, and you can't choose between those two, or two really bad options. And it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. Because if it's an obvious good option,
right,
and bad option, it's like, it's boring.
There's no conflict. It's like, it's obvious. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So anyway, I look at like Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
And I think they're fabulous storytellers. I mean, they've first of all, they have the discipline to stick to their story, which is something that we also have to deal with, is people getting all over the place because they want to be all things to all people. But the narrative there is structure versus freedom. It's rebellion, you know, and so all of their stuff. So that's the narrative, like, you know, maybe structure versus freedom, or I don't know. We could be more specific. But then every story you tell is some version of of structure versus freedom.
Yeah.
And so that just seems to make sense to me. I don't know whether anybody has actually started out from that point and then done a good job of storytelling. But it seems like it would be a good point to start from, right? I've only just started thinking about that just in the last couple of months. So
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Harley too, because I was, you know, they've had their struggles, and I was just reading in the news, and it's not such a surprise. I mean, they're having a hard time. You know, they're really having a hard time, and they were, you know, they were the last surviving true American motorcycle company, and they're just, I think a lot of it is that, you know, the rise of the millennials, and maybe they don't see their choices maybe through that lens of a structure versus freedom, because they didn't grow up maybe with the same constraints or mental model about thinking about structure. So then the question becomes is, you're right. And there's so much to be said about storytelling consistency. And then there's the reality, which is, does that story fit? And for new customers, does their story still map to that? Or do we need to change that a little bit? What's the truth that millennials are bumping up against? And maybe it's not a structure versus freedom, but maybe it's something else.
Yeah.
What is that? You know,
so the articles I've read are about how millennials were told they were special, and they were told they were smart.
Yeah.
And we were told, I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, my dad told me that I needed to work hard. Yeah. My dad made sure that I had resumes when I was 14 years old, and I would go find my summer jobs by myself, you know, pounding the pavement with the resumes. Of course, it wasn't really by myself. I found out later that, you know, he had connections, but it felt like, you know, he gave me practice in doing that. And so my whole world was built on the fact that I'm going to have to work my ass off, which of course made me ill. You know, I did too much. But if you don't have to work your ass off, then at least you haven't been trained to work your ass off. Then freedom from structure really doesn't mean anything.
Right.
But the one thing that does mean something to millennials, I think, is vintage.
Yeah.
So if they would get, you know, into the vintage and authenticity story, versus fake, I think that they may find.
I think you're onto something. I think there's a story there, and it occurs to me that, and I totally wholeheartedly agree with you. You know, without conflict and vulnerability, you don't have a story. There's no story there. And you know, without a real choice, and a lot of these brand storytelling, to me, it's very diluted, because I'm like, what's the option? Of course, it's obvious you're going to do this. It's not even a real. It's a fake, contrived conflict. But I think what's interesting to me then is when we sort of extrapolate, because I'm tail end Gen Xer. I had to work my buns off. I wasn't told that you were special and you were entitled. I didn't get any of that. But I do feel like with the millennials, there has to be a redefined conflict, a conflict that's meaningful for them, and in a way that appeals to them. And I think that's where I think businesses need to get better, because that fakeness in storytelling, they can't stand. Millennials have that aversion to your point. There's the authentic and there's the fake, and they have sort of an ability to sniff it out.
And it's a big deal. The litmus test of that is you know, that everything has to be filtered through that. And by the way, when I talk about us learning to work our ass off and that sort of stuff, I'm not saying that you know, our generation was any better, because one of the things that we did not learn is that whole litmus test of authenticity.
Yeah.
And so that accounts for us abandoning ourselves, you know, as and becoming corporate slaves or whatever, you know,
Right.
bad things happen in that direction.
It's absolutely right. And I think one of the things that's great about the millennial generation is that there is this push towards authenticity, and that's a good thing. And what does it mean for then brands who then have to be more authentic? And I think this is a generation, you know, that from what I'm reading is, and they're not that much younger than me, but they will abandon a brand if that brand does not live up to its values.
Volkswagen.
Exactly. They will abandon them, and there's no loyalty. And so the only loyalty there is in brands right now with millennials is, do you care about people? Are you helping society? Do you have a mission bigger than yourself? And it just seems to me that's where the big T right now, the opportunity to be vulnerable, be honest, do that. And they're not doing it. And Volkswagen's a great example of like, wow, did they blow it? Did they blow it?
You know, and as you're, yeah, right. It's like, This American Life, I think it was Ira Glass, just did a show on Volkswagen with 3 options. Did you listen to that?
I didn't. Do share.
Because like they went to advertising agencies and asked them, okay, what would you do now? And one of them was, I would do a documentary on how this happened and who was to blame. And really explore the story. And I mean, you know, blame is a bad word, but there's the contrast.
Yeah.
There's, you know, and the vulnerability, and it actually, I don't think would damage, cause it's like, you know, damage worse than this. How can, but coming clean, I thought it was a brilliant idea, to fund a documentary. And then another one is, but I can't remember the other ones, but they were all 3 kind of like, we blew it, you know, we totally screwed up. And I think that's the only real path, you know, to recovering the consumer facing side. I think that one of the things I see is that, you know, the business to business side has different rules than the consumer to business side. Or you can get away with different things because there's a sense of collusion in the business to business stuff that's still functional, if you will.
Yeah. No, it's true. You know, and listening to you, no, I hear what you're saying, and I feel that. Although I do think that is by and large an artificial construct, because human beings are human beings, and even in a B2B capacity. And I know this is where the big T comes in. And I think those walls are going to have to come down, because as buyers become more millennial centered and they rise up in influence and power, I can't help but think that has to change. These artificial constructs of, well, we can't do that in B2B. Well, who says? I mean,
I pray that you're right. And I totally agree. It's an artificial construct.
Yeah.
But all culture, to some extent, is an artificial construct.
True.
And it's the culture. And I remember when I first did territorial games, the way I explained the territorial games is that it's totally natural, you know, for you to want to keep this information, because information is power. And so when I debrief it, I'm like, you know, the good news is this is not your fault. If you play some of these territorial games, it's completely understandable. It's natural. And then the bad news is that those other people that play these games, not their fault. It's completely natural. So everybody needs to just chill, basically. It's, you know, kind of what I was, that's what I teach. It's, you know, and is a certain, because you can't be vulnerable unless you have a certain tolerance for your own vulnerability. And I can't be vulnerable in front of somebody else without their, for instance, I'm teaching a course, a communication course at Brookings Institute, and I've got a whole bunch of government people. I've been working with the government since 1998.
And you haven't lost your mind yet, so that's good.
You know, I have to take little, you know, kind of take some vacations from that environment. But so I wasn't telling. Oh, right. So, you know, there's different cultures in different agencies, and there's a particular culture in the military that does not value open and vulnerable communication.
Yes.
I'm trying to keep myself out of hot water here.
Being very polite. You're being very polite.
It's not a natural thing. So
not for me either. I don't have that.
It's like, that's why when I'm being polite, my words come really slow because
filter's working overtime. Yeah. Me too.
It's like, man, my brain is like shut down. Okay. So what was I telling you? Okay. So this guy, so I teach storytelling now as part of communication, but it's not the main thing.
Yeah.
Because first of all, storytelling is like, nobody's going to sign off on your training, invoice, particularly if you're in the military to go to a story. Although I have taught storytelling courses a lot in the military, at Quantico.
Oh, wow.
And also the Naval Academy. Wow. And so the military is one of the things that I can use to validate storytelling. It's like, okay, the military is investing in this, and they don't invest in stuff that doesn't work. Yeah. And they understand that they have to do a better job storytelling. But the resistance to it, I think, in the military is also duplicated in some corporate situations.
Yeah.
And the idea that emotions mean you're weak is a huge deal. Yeah. And of course, and I think women have an advantage there because we know that emotions are actually the secret of strength.
Yeah.
And passion. And it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because you are gonna have to experience your own emotions before you can be a good storyteller.
Yeah. And boy, talk about the litmus test and under fire. If you can get the military to do that, and I grew up with, my dad was a Marine, so let me tell you about vulnerability in my house. But if you can get the military to do that, it seems to me you can get corporate America, because it's sort of this post-industrial complex. It grew up, a corporate America in this hierarchical, almost militaristic fashion. And it seems to me there are opportunities to change that if you can do that in the military. Corporate America can. And getting back to the millennials, I'm seeing millennial CEOs be much more embracing of that narrative and like, yeah, of course. We're not 100, it's not a 180 degree, but I feel like we're headed that direction with certain companies. And I see that a lot in tech because you have millennials that are starting companies and they're saying, hey, we want to put our stamp on it. We want to do it our way. And we want to be authentic and we want to do all this stuff.
And now I remember why I told you that story, because I was like, what the hell? Okay. So the reason I told you that story is that when I first did the territorial games, it was like, okay, this is instinct, but if we can evolve an opposing thumb, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking we can evolve some new behaviors.
Yeah.
So that we can survive as a species.
Yeah.
And I think the millennials are very much a part of that.
Yeah.
Or at least, that's the story I'm telling myself. And so, and you look at the internet, it just requires transparency.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to get by with shit anymore, you know, those days are over.
Oh yeah. Well, just sniff around Volkswagen and see what happens when and oof, I mean, it's you can't get away with that anymore. You just can't.
Not for very long, I look at the people who still do get away with that. I think it would be disingenuous to say, because I know, we both work with really big companies and you hear the stories about what they can and can't get by with. And so I don't want to invalidate that.
Sure.
But wouldn't it be nice?
Yeah.
If transparency has become a requirement,
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Prisoner's Dilemma. Are you familiar with that research paradigm?
Yes, I am very familiar with the Prisoner's Dilemma. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So so there's evidence that if you can see the face of the person you're playing this game with, your behavior is completely changed.
Yeah.
So if we apply that, robust finding about human nature, then our behaviors, I don't know how we explain people bullying each other on Facebook, of course, because, they say it's anonymity. I guess they can see my face, but only if they click on it, maybe. But I'd like to think that, or maybe we're just more aware of the sort of bullying behavior now that it's documented in on a page. But I would like to think that transparency is going to be just operating, procedure from now on.
I hope so. And this is where culture, to your point, culture and storytelling really merge, because it does come out of the culture. And I do think, it's interesting. In Silicon Valley, some of the things that I see are companies that are struggling to attract employees when in a market where tech talent, if you're a programmer or an engineer or developer, it's very hot. And what I see, it's interesting. At a certain level, they're all making good money. So it's not like your benefits over here are a much more attractive package than the benefits over here. So at some point, that's negligible and has almost no effect, because they're going to get offers that are all competitive. But what's really interesting to see with a lot of people that I talk to is they're starting to ask questions about the company. And, I don't like the way they do that, and the story that they're telling the customers about who they are, that's not how we get treated internally. That's not how I feel we are. And so the employees themselves are going, there's a mismatch between this external world of storytelling and who we all as employees think about the story. And there's a company that I did some work for, and she'll go unnamed, and they grew very large by acquisition. They buy all these other tech companies. And I was doing a workshop with their employees, and their employees were like, what do you think of the new corporate story? And I said, that really doesn't matter. You work here. What do you think? And they said, it's horrible. It's horrible. It's like they're shoving this story at their customers of like, this and that and the other thing, and who they are and how they treat people internally. It's like we have no say in it. And so there's this big credibility gap. And that is painful.
One of my favorite things about storytelling is that if you start working on story's going to start working on you.
Yeah.
And I love that part. That's the sweet little benefit. That's the reason why I go into places like Quantico, and it's it's and I did have 2 guys walk out. There's about 120 people. And one guy was attacking me. The people who raise their hand, like, and if you when you say yes, what you're inviting, and then
you pissing people off,
which is is kind of what I do best. So
capital T.
So big T truth. So what I do when I'm teaching storytelling is that I create a container for talking about this stuff that's different than talking about that stuff. And so that stuff is objective, small T truth, facts, research, which we now understand. We've been calling it the truth. Numbers don't lie, which is hilarious. It's like the numbers lie. That's the best way to lie. It's like numbers.
They lie all the time.
And so it's like, okay, so that's all that's true. It's like, I won't argue with anybody about any of that. It's like totally true. Right. So what we're talking about is somebody's point of view, the subjective, perceptual point of view. And that's where storytelling, and I have to get permission from these guys to talk about, because they'll say your perception is your truth, like they understand it. And it's like, and so we know how true that is, because if we're going to tell a story, we actually have to go to where that person is.
Yeah.
And tell the story so they can see it from their point of view. And sometimes, you know, you can actually go to that place and then walk them around, you know, to a different point of view. But you can't just yell from this point of view, you know, and expect them to just leap over. That doesn't happen.
Yeah, a good friend of mine who used to work for Royal Dutch Shell and, you know, around the world. And boy, you talk about people who hate the story. Anytime you even try to talk about the good you're doing in a community, people hate you because you're an oil company. And it's like, and he used to say that, you know, bringing rational facts to an emotional debate is like wielding a knife in a gunfight. You know, it's like you're going to lose because the emotions are the only truth that matters to people. It's not your facts. And he was right. And I used to laugh, but it's like, boy, if there ever was a truthful statement, that was it, you know.
I love the knife in a gunfight. That would work with the military guys.
And it's accurate because you can't fight how somebody feels. The emotional truth is their truth. That's their truth.
That's why they suck at dealing with terrorism.
Yeah.
You know, let me just take back they suck at dealing with terrorism. Let me just erase that. I did not say that. So that's why terrorism is such a challenge.
Yes, it is.
Because it's purely emotional. There's no rational. I mean, people are committing suicide. Right. So let's just take the rational out and understand what the story is.
That's it.
And Kendall Haven, who was at that thing we went to in San Francisco with Michael Margolis, Kendall Haven has, you know, was participating with the Defense Department. Millions of dollars they spent trying to understand what is a story and how does story work. So I'm not the first one to bring that message over there.
Right.
Right. They put people in MRIs and PET scans and all that sort of stuff. Did you get to hear him talk, Kendall?
I heard a little bit. There were two people at the same time I wanted to hear, so I kind of snuck in and out of both, and I got to hear a little bit of what he said, and it's absolutely fascinating what he was talking about. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out a research paradigm. I want to publish more research about storytelling, you know, in action.
Yeah.
Because healthcare is a place for, you know, patient stories to make a huge difference in behavioral issues, which is kind of most of our health problems are due to behavior that.
Yes.
You know, we're not taking care of ourselves.
Absolutely.
And the problem is, because they've got the deep pockets, they certainly have the incentive to use storytelling to change people's behaviors. But their research habits for evidence-based remove all the emotion from the story, and they remove the subjectivity, and then they come up with results that, you know, it doesn't matter this. Okay, I was reading a meta-analysis for all this research, right?
Yeah.
And they demonstrated that stories that are told on video, where you have, you know, face and interaction, actually work better than audio, and that audio works better than writing.
Huh.
Like, duh.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's what you discovered. That's what you spent thousands of dollars on.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But the actual story they told, in order for it to fit the research paradigm, was boring as crap.
Yeah. So
we can do better.
We can do a lot better. And you know, and it's true. I've heard this before as well, especially with respect to healthcare. And I've only, you know, done a little bit in the healthcare space, and there are people far more prolific out there doing healthcare storytelling. And from what I've seen, it's like, you know, I remember having a conversation with a very large HMO out here in California. Very large, rhymes with miser. And I'll leave it at that. And but he didn't hear, and you know, and it's, well, yeah, we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't. It's like, you can, and it's not, don't give me the HIPAA excuse, because you still can. You need to have that, because there's still this perception of HMOs. You can't choose your doctor, you can't have this. You need to be out there with storytelling from customers who are your greatest fans who maybe had their minds changed about their experience with you. You cannot control this. You need to be listening to the people. And the people who have legitimate complaints about you, you should care about those people, because sometimes people are pissed off and they have bad interactions, and you could learn from them. Like, their stories matter, and you could actually
public health is a place where there is no downside to listening to patient stories. There's no, I mean, and I can't even get it to happen in public health, because I went down to New Orleans, I had a whole bunch of public health people, and they wanted to learn how to tell data stories, right? So I looked at the data, and okay, I'm going to be good here. One of the measures is child death in co-sleeping situations.
Oh, wow.
So, and then of course there are, diabetes and all the other ones, right?
Yeah.
So in a co-sleeping situation, their answer is to create enormous, campaigns to convince people not to sleep with their kids, right? Well, so I go in there and I want to talk about, painting class starts in 15 minutes. That's what that was. I have a studio in my backyard. I can take painting, walk out the backyard. Okay. So, so I asked, they wanted me to help with data stories, and they kept going to the data, and I said, and this woman actually gave me the opening, and she goes, why do these women continue to sleep with their babies? Why don't they understand that they're taking a risk, whatever? So this is her story, man.
Yeah.
And the same woman said, we were in a meeting, and one of these policemen said, it's a dangerous neighborhood. There's drive-by shootings. There's drugs.
There you go.
And these are people related to her. And she puts her baby in her bed because it's safer for the baby.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's the story.
That's the story. Yeah.
And so if you want to change, and so infant mortality needs to be looked at in a larger context. Yeah. Who knows what she's saving the child from?
I thought so.
Yeah. Domestic crap, domestic violence, and that sort of stuff. So anyway, we've got a job to do.
Yeah, no, all great points. How do you, as we sort of kind of try to give some advice, I mean, it's always hard. Where do you start? So where do you advise, companies, whether it's B2B or B2C, take that out of the equation for a minute. How do you advise them to really start thinking about really mining for that big T in their stories to go deeper? How do you start that?
Well, the way I do it is if I've already coming in to teach storytelling, which is a big if, and we can go back to the other situation. Yeah. The first story I ask them about is, who are you and why are you here? Mm-hmm. And I do it really fast, and they tell a story, because it's not really that you don't have skills to tell stories. So you don't need me to teach you skills, right? Yeah. What I want to deliver an experience, a profound emotional experience of what it is to tell your story. Mm-hmm. And, by the second hour, they're sold, because they've told their story, they've listened to these other people's story, and they've experienced how it changes the context completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's almost like if there was a hole right here where information, could go through, and there was only about this much information, you tell that story and it goes like this, and all of a sudden it's a fire hose of connection. And once you've experienced that, you can't forget it.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose you can, but not while I'm in the room.
Well, and what you said resonates, that's a big T, because I so agree. I think if you're a company and you know your mission so well, you know why you're here, and it's bigger than making money. There's a social component. You have a mission, not a plan for making money. You have a mission, a bigger social mission. seems to me that's, you know, you're not rudderless, and it gives meaning to the big T to everything you do. And I think that's where I see a lot of companies kind of fall, is I go back to the big mission story and I go, maybe that's what needs to be worked on, is that yes, that's not clear. Because if you were clear, you'd know where you are, and that's important, you know.
And it's actually when, you know, back in 2000 when I published the book on storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't having to overcome false promises.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So one of the problems with business storytelling is and also it's one of the reasons why I don't really blog, because if I tell the truth, it's not nearly as attractive as some of the crap that's being put out there about storytelling.
Yeah.
And I don't mean crap in terms of they don't know what they're talking about. I mean that it's aspirational. They really haven't had to go through fire with a story.
Yeah.
And it's only when you've gone through fire with a story that I think you understand how to construct a story that will withstand fire.
Yeah. Well said. I like that. Well, and it'll be interesting to see how Volkswagen emerges from this, because if you say you're X in the world and you don't stand by your principles when you're under fire, that should have guided you to tell the truth. You need to question what your values are in the world. You've got to be really clear in that. And I think that if you're a company with clear values, you're going to get tested. Your stories are going to, you know, take some heat, and you're going to have to see whether or not they hold up, and are they strong enough? And so I think I like that a lot. It's, again, you know, you can't bring facts to a gunfight. You know, hopefully you don't have a gunfight, but that's the reality of the market. You got to have a great story. You've got to have the true tea of emotional thing, not the facts. Yeah.
And it's and to a certain extent, I guess what we're teaching people is not just that they have to have a great story; is they have to be living a great story.
Living it, yeah, that's it.
And that's the point at which you were talking about, or I just got a text, and my brain can't not say that. Okay, so that's the place where teaching, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
The rollout, like our consulting, I don't know about you, but it's like, who is it that we get to train? You know, so I get to train leadership people, and I get to train communications people. Mm-hmm. Now, what's happened is that I've started to change what it is I say I do. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I'm a behavioral scientist. I've been training leadership for a long time. So I've backed off the word storytelling. And I'm teaching communication. And when I teach communication, one of the little tricks I use comes from Arduous. And so this is something people can do just for the hell of it, is you take a bad communication experience, and on the right-hand side of the paper, and this is Chris Argyris, straight out of the book, but with a twist, you write what you said and what they said, and then what you said, and then what they said. So I think anybody who flies will have a sample of a airline employee, you know, he said, she said. And then once you've got that, then to the left, you write in the story you're telling yourself when you said that. So a lot of times we say, excuse me, is this flight whatever? But that's not the story we're telling ourselves. The story we're telling ourselves is she doesn't care about me. I know she doesn't care about me, but by God, I need to get to where I need to get to, or whatever. Yeah. So that's the story. Yeah. And then she responds and she says, can you give me a minute? Which, you know, on the surface of, that's the message. Can you give me a minute? But the story she's telling herself, and we're just guessing here, is I hate my company because they overbook, and I'm trying to achieve things that you have no idea how impossible they are. Yeah. And so you think you have a problem? You know, I've got 40 people that have been, you know, told they're going to Chicago at 2, and I don't know how I'm going to get them there. So anyway, it's a good exercise to do. And I do it with my participants, my students.
Yeah.
And once they realize, that's another good way to introduce people to story.
Great way.
Is to demonstrate how your story is actually more important than what you think you're saying, because people know.
Isn't that true? No, it's, boy, and the minute you walk up to that counter, you've already got a story in your head about your day, and this person is the obstacle between you and getting to where your destination, and you've already built this whole story up. And I think that's so important to recognize that, you know, we're forming stories all day long, and that's how we navigate the world. And
it's good practice. It's good practice whenever you're walking up and you realize you got an attitude. Yeah. It's really good practice. And of course, we used to call this assume positive intent, but now if you think about what their story is, it's even better guidance for your brain.
Yeah.
For you know, trying to figure out what their positive intent story is. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten on a lot more planes that were overbooked this way. So, I mean, you know, nothing succeeds like success.
And a great attitude. It's true. It's totally true.
Yeah. So that would be a good thing to practice, just to train yourself up.
Yeah. It's a great thing to practice. All right. Let's spend a minute here. What you got going on that you want to tell our audience about? What's new in your world? Where would you like to send people? Maybe a URL. What do you want to talk about?
Let's see. Well, my website's Annette Simmons, right? And if you're working in government, I'm teaching a class at Brookings Institute, so you can find a communications class there if you're in government. And on a personal level, one of the things I'm working on is a friend of mine is a nurse, and you know, I have had problems with fibromyalgia, right?
Oh, I didn't know. Oh, wow.
Oh, you didn't know that? I couldn't work for 2 years, girl. I completely missed out on 2012 and 13.
Oh, my goodness.
I wasn't here.
Yeah.
And boy, when I came back, had things changed.
Yeah.
So, so fibromyalgia is obviously a behavior-based, you know, sort of, it's the way you stress yourself out that causes fibromyalgia. It's the story you tell yourself about. So we're talking about how we can use patient stories the way they should be used. Yes. And if we can prove that, then maybe, you know, I can get public health to start to listen to how, you know, patient stories can work, should work. Because right now, as the best that it gets is a patient kind of telling their story on a video. And there's just so much low-hanging fruit to help people take better care of themselves. And, you know, like this is going to save money. There's no downside, you know, to doing this right.
No, and if you're telling your stories right, that's prevention for other people, and that's what that's about. So that's fantastic. And you can also, everybody, you can check her out on Twitter at The Story Factor, where she's got a lot of good stuff to share. And I'm at keepingithuman.com. You can find me at Twitter at Kathy Klotz-Guest, no hyphen, because I'm super clever like that in my Twitter handle. Annette, as always, I so love chatting with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I adore you. It's fun.
It's mutual.
We'll talk again soon.
You got it, girl. All right. You go have some more pumpkin pie and go paint.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.